Guys, thank you, Andrew, for joining me. Let's get into this. So, a little right before we started recording this podcast, news broke from Bleacher Report that scouts aren't really high on this draft class as top-end talent. Scouts told Albert Breer, a couple of veteran NFL evaluators told me late in the week that they don't believe there's a single NFL starter in this year's quarterback class. Not everyone was that harsh, but it was unanimous that these quarterbacks aren't close to last year's, and most agreed that all 5 of last year's first-round signal callers would have been the top guys at the position in the 2022 NFL Draft. We saw 5 quarterbacks taken in the first round last year. There are 2 to 3 guys that are being talked about as possible first-round picks this year. The guy who impressed the most during the Senior Bowl, Kenny Pickett, showed the most consistency out of all the quarterbacks at the Senior Bowl, but really wasn't all that super impressive during the practices. Malik Willis is viewed as having the highest ceiling of all these guys. He needs to end up in the right situation. He's the most athletic and most impressive, but he played at Liberty and Auburn, and both those offenses weren't really NFL offenses. When it comes to the running back position, Tyler Beatty impressed as a pass catcher, but Dameon Pierce, the Florida running back, impressed across the board. Whether that was pass blocking, receiving, or running the ball, he was the most impressive of all those at the position across the board. When it comes to guys, FCS guys that really impressed, I want to look at the offensive line. Trevor Penn from Northern Iowa showed a nasty temperament and impressed scouts. He didn't play against the best competition playing at Northern Iowa, but he does have the potential to be a great offensive lineman in the NFL. And then the story across the board all weekend and all week, I should say, was the Senior Bowl defensive lineman, all impressed. And it was hard to choose one guy that impressed the most. So we're just going to cover that as the whole defensive line of just being guys that could be different makers at the next level. And then keep an eye out for a video on this prospect, Montana State's Troy Anderson. There were a lot of questions on whether he deserved to be at the Senior Bowl and whether he was going to bring talent to the next level. Man, he proved he belonged and impressed a lot of scouts at the Senior Bowl. I think one of the more interesting things people are talking about, although they're not as high on this year's NFL draft class, this has the potential to be a class for 10 years down the line. We look at this and say, how did we miss on these guys? Why were these guys graded so badly? Because they end up having long NFL careers. And a lot of that has to do with there being no true, wow, that's a first overall guy. We need to grab him. It allows for these quarterbacks to end up in situations where they maybe have time to develop and land in situations that are best for them. And they're not thrown into the fire right away. I mean, Kenny Pickett's being projected to the Pittsburgh Steelers, and it's going to be a fun thing to watch.